aside from just living life, you're dealing with bipolar as well. And just like the management of it and just the day-to-day grind of, having to remember to take your medication, having to like do some kind of check-in to make sure you're not having, like symptoms, making sure you go to your doctors, yada, yada, yada. Like there's this whole level that, normal people don't have to worry about all that much.
Hi all, a quick introduction to my chat with Joshua. He's an American guy struggling with bipolar 1, has been diagnosed I think about 20 years ago. He's now coming to terms with his diagnosis and trying to take things more seriously, having struggled with the stigma earlier in life. It's a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
I've had a very strange week. I did the pre-call before the interview that I did with you, with another girl who's going to take part. She teaches autistic kids, and it got me thinking. I got into some research, learning about autism, preparing for that interview. And I've come to realize that actually I think I have autism, which came as a bit of a shock to me because I'm so mild I must be so mild on the spectrum that I've flown under the radar all this time.
Mm-hmm.
But I watched I read some articles, watched some videos, and there was one video in particular which said if you've been undiagnosed autistic and now you've been diagnosed, you might find you have these symptoms. Count which ones you have out of 25. And it was easier for me to count the ones I didn't have, including little things like, not little things, very specific things that I've been struggling with my whole life, such as digestive issues, sleep issues, struggling with bright lights, get into social issues of making connections and interpersonal relationships. I'd always considered a lot of that to be due to my trauma and my past. And I read about autism and it says you're born with it, which I don't know. It's left me reevaluating my whole life,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's similar to you because you have bipolar 1, right? When did you find out?
So I was first diagnosed with it when I was in my freshman year of college. So that puts it somewhere around 1991. I got the diagnosis. I was given medication. I was given 3 medications. I was given Wellbutrin, Stelazine, and Tegretol, which I took for about a month, maybe a couple weeks. And the reason being is, I was just too immature to handle it. I also didn't want to admit that I had this. And then there's this part of me that just didn't believe that I had it, despite, all the symptoms that go along with bipolar. So back then, there wasn't the awareness and there wasn't the acceptance of mental health diseases that there are now, which, that is still, that there's still a stigma attached to many of them. And, it's a process that, we're bringing it into the mainstream, I should say, is, a process that I want to be part of, and this is part of my coming out, if you will, with bipolar, which we spoke about, and, doing this podcast is part of this for me. But that was the first time I was diagnosed. And then I, went another, I don't know, 6 or 7 years untreated before I got the diagnosis again. And I got the diagnosis and I took this medication called Depakote, which absolutely numbed me and also caused extreme weight gain. When I say extreme, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 pounds that I put on in about a year. And then I just got sick of it. I was more into doing drugs than anything else. And I just kind of reverted to doing that almost full time. And then after that, the next time I was diagnosed was sometime 2007, 2008. And then that is when I finally started to take it more seriously. And then over the past 5 years is really when I've taken it most seriously, where I've just, changed my life to accommodate the illness. And so
most recent 5 years, you mean?
Yeah, most recent 5 years.
Okay.
That's when I, made the most changes in treating the illness, which includes, being very disciplined about sleep, disciplined about taking medication, disciplined about seeing doctors, both psychiatrists and psychologists, and it's helped. It's helped a lot. And there's
Except,
things that I'm still finding at my age, and having had it for this long, that I need to do to better treat it and better maintain it. One thing I just mentioned, work. One thing is work. Bipolar is a progressive disease, meaning that it gets worse as you get older. So one of the things
I
that,
didn't know that.
yeah,
Okay. I mean,
yeah,
I'm reading as we're talking. So you have at least one manic episode mixed in with um, depressive episodes, and you have a very balanced period as well. I forget what you called that. You gave
uh,
it a name.
in the industry, in the medical world, rather, they
Yeah,
call it euthymic or euthymia.
euthymic. That's right.
Yeah,
Accepting yourself for who you are is a huge part of the process. And for me, like I said to you, I found out that I've got traits of autism. I found out 4 days ago. And don't get me wrong, for the first 8 hours or something, I was really depressive. And it does bring you down to some degree until then you reframe it and then you understand yourself and you go, right, so this is what I'm dealing with. And it gives you more information to solve the puzzle. And it's very important to frame things in a positive manner. I know it's not easy all the
yeah,
time. Like, we all get down, but understanding and accepting yourself is a part of that journey, which it sounds like you've done, but maybe you've had to go over a couple of mountains and down in the
yeah.
valley as well at some points.
And I'm still somewhat reluctant with it, because I wish that there was some positive that you could find in the illness, but there just isn't, or I haven't been able to find it yet. Some people say, oh, when I'm manic, I can just, work and work and work, and I have all these ideas and thoughts bouncing off of thoughts. The reality is that while you might be able to do work, it's going to be very poor work. Like, this is true of most anybody. Of course, there are these outliers who can, find a way to channel it and do great work. But I think one of the key takeaways that I want everybody to have is that the illness is unique to every person. For every person, it's going to be different. It's not like, a cut, let's say. When
A
everybody
what?
gets
Sorry?
a cut, like when you cut your finger or you cut your
Sure.
arm,
Yeah.
something like that, a cut is a cut, unless you have some kind of illness where, you don't produce enough white blood cells, you're going to have that cut and you're going to have it heal. And that's consistent through, all walks of life. Bipolar, it's not that way. It just isn't. Some people, for instance, they get diagnosed with bipolar and they get a slew of meds to manage their symptoms,
Hmm.
and that's it. They don't need to change it for the rest of their lives. In my case, I have what's called treatment resistant bipolar. So I've had to change my medication. I don't know how many times. I'm not even going to try counting, but it's been at least at a minimum a year to twice a year for, the past 14, 15 years that I've
Really?
had. Yeah. And so changing the medication means, first and foremost, that you need to have some awareness about your symptoms, which, one of the symptoms of bipolar is it's difficult to identify your symptoms. You're just in those states and you don't really get it. And in hindsight, it's just crazy. Like now I'm, euthymic and I'm in a good state. But, when I have these major depressive disorders, like crawled up on the floor, just hoping for a better day, I guess.
Yeah.
But, that'll be me for whatever reason, I land on the floor when I have depressive symptoms. So I'll be down there for like all day, literally. I'll be there for hours and hours and hours, and I don't find anything wrong with it. I'm just there, and I don't talk to my doctor, and I don't, make it known that I've been on the floor, and that's a problem. That's a real problem,
I mean,
obviously.
the first thing I'll say is thank you for being so honest and vulnerable. It does
Sure.
take a lot of courage. So I give you props for that. The thing I'll
Thanks.
say is that I also struggle in that way, where I will have depressive days where I don't want to leave the sofa, for example, and just flicking through YouTube or random crap that would just waste your life. I'm curious to understand for you where your mindset is when you change between different states and how much control you have over that. I for me, as an example, I tend to find when I'm positive, happy, active with my body, like doing exercise, not drinking, not doing drugs or whatever, then I'm a lot more in control of my emotions and therefore my actions. For you, I don't know how much control you have when you flip between, say, a manic episode to a euthymic episode. And when that does happen, are you aware of any triggers that make those changes for you?
No, there's nothing I can do to manage it, and there's really no kind of triggers that'll put you in, either a depressive episode or a manic episode. It just happens, and that's, another one of the challenges with it. There's a lot of tools. So let's talk about depression for a second. There's many different
To be
types
clear,
of.
we can go, the conversation go any way you want. I'll lead
Okay,
off of you. So
okay.
we'll talk
So
depression,
let's talk
which I'm
depression.
an
So
expert in as well when I think about it. But sorry, I
okay.
won't interrupt you.
So depression, there's many different flavors of it.
Yeah.
There's having a major depressive disorder. There's what's called situational depression. There's what's called atypical depression. There's what I just call environmental depression. So, you could be depressed because your cat died. You could be depressed because, a loved one passed away, or maybe you didn't get a score that you were hoping for on a test. All these different kind of environmental factors can contribute to, a type of depression, which is treatable without drugs and is treatable by, what I just call like some of the rhetoric of psychiatry. In psychiatry, they say, you can do cognitive behavioral therapy that'll help with depression. You could do exercise that's going to help with depression. You can do any one of a number of things that it is going to help with depression. But those things, when you have a major depressive disorder, they do not help at all. So that's part of the difference with bipolar as well, is that you just don't have you don't have the
You don't have two
tools.
hands on the wheel.
Yeah, you don't have the tools to help you get out of it. The only thing that works, it's one thing, and that's getting a medication adjustment. And that's really the story with bipolar. Like the whole thing is about medicate. I should say the whole thing with managing it is medication.
I'm curious. Okay, let's dive into depression then. When was your last depressive episode? And can you
I actually
describe
just came out of one. It was about 3 months.
3 months ago, or it lasted for three
It,
months?
it, it lasted 3 months. I just came out of it over the past 6 weeks,
Good.
and
Okay.
that
I'm
was
glad you're out of it.
yeah, 4 to 6 weeks, something like that. And the reason was that I had an adjustment to my medication.
Okay. What was the adjustment?
I was introduced to a new medication called
Yeah.
Wellbutrin.
From what to what? And was it the same dosage, change in dosage?
No, it was a completely new medication.
Yeah, but so were you getting, what was the old medication? What were you taking before?
So well, I mean, I'm still taking all of them. It wasn't like one got swapped out for another.
Okay.
It was just added to it.
Okay.
To it.
And did you notice the effect immediately?
No, it took a couple weeks. It took a couple weeks for it to take hold, which is about right. It takes a little bit of time for the medication to work.
But let me be clear. You think you had you did have a 3-month depressive episode due to your medication changing. And
No. This was independent of the medication.
okay, so the new medication they gave you has made you feel better.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So prior to that, so we're talking about, where are we now? September, July, August. So we're talking like the end of April that you started to struggle with this depressive episode. Is that right?
No, where are we now? We're in September. Yeah, I'd say it's more like maybe June. Yeah, maybe June is when it started, around that.
And what was happening around that time? Was there anything major
Um,
with work or
no, nothing major with
relationships or?
work. I have a real low stress job, thankfully. That's another thing with bipolar. I mentioned earlier, it's a progressive illness, and there are just things that you can't do over time. When I was younger, and not that much younger, I used to just crave stress. Like I loved the high pressure work environments that I was in, and I was doing technology management, and just loved the pressure, loved the stress. But then it just came to a point where I couldn't handle it anymore for whatever reason, and the whatever in that reason is my bipolar is worsening. So I just didn't have the capacity to take it on and, either work the crazy hours needed to, or just be able to, make quick decisions. Everything just slowed down. Inability to prioritize, like all these things kind of came together in, it's unfortunate. It is, but this is the cards that I have been dealt, and I need to play with them, so I
It's
need to find a way
difficult,
to
isn't
work
it?
around it. It is difficult.
On one hand, you understand yourself a lot better. You understand what you're dealing with. Sometimes it's easier to see a particular reaction to something or understand you're in a particular episode. But then at the same time, you're out of control compared with what we'd say a normal person. And that also
Yeah.
brings with it a set of challenges of the emotion, the guilt, the shame that you have. You think, why am I different? Why do I have to be like this? And sometimes that spiral can bring you down, or at least that's what I've found.
Yeah.
So nothing at all you thought was going on at the time, and it just came out of nowhere. That must be difficult, man. I'm really sorry to
It,
hear.
yeah, it is. And that's how it has been, like I've, I've had so many manic episodes, so many depressive episodes, and it just, I wish that there was a trigger. I wish that there was something that I'd be able to avoid, or something that I'd be able to mitigate, but there just isn't. It's just how my brain is wired, and it stinks. My going through history, I could say that this, at least to my knowledge, started with my grandmother. My grandmother was institutionalized for a period of time. I'm not sure how long, and she had manic depression, which is what they called bipolar back in the day, So this was, God, I don't know how many years ago. This was decades ago, decades
On,
and
on,
decades
is this on your mother's side or your father's side?
on my father's side.
Okay. So part of what I'm doing with the podcast is trying to understand where these things come from, and it's again interesting that you've got this hereditary factor. I also believe that and it's my personal belief that a lot of my issues have come from my environment. So I'm curious to know, before we dig into your grandmother, what your relationship was like growing up with your father.
Amazing. He's my best friend.
Okay, cool.
I'm so lucky, and I'm acutely aware of it. My family life coming up. I could not ask for a more caring, loving group of people to be around, and
Dope.
that's just amazing. And one of the important things with bipolar is having a good support system. And between my wife and my sisters, I have three of them, and my parents, who are, thank God, still alive. It's just amazing. It's exactly what I need. If I'm in the hospital, they come to visit me. If I'm, just euthymic, they're talking to me. We talk every week. Me and my sisters, we talk every week, and it's fantastic.
I'm
And
kind
I'm,
of
and I'm glad
jealous.
that we do it, because,
Yeah, I bet.
it's one of those things that, like, you hear about, like the old guy or gal who's on their deathbed and they're asked what they regret, and it's always, something around like relationships with people. So, if you have uh, a dicey relationship with your family, like, my encouragement is to try to work it out, because it's really important. It's really important.
Everyone's different, right?
Everyone's different. Yeah, I'm aware
What,
that,
what,
and I have a friend who basically had to raise himself. He lived in a home with an alcoholic father and a mother who likely has some kind of mental illness, and that's tough. That's really tough.
that was my experience. I'm glad yours wasn't. Given that your father just seems like your best friend is pretty stable by the sounds of it, can I ask about your mother?
I love her. She's amazing.
And zero
Amazing.
issues anywhere along there.
None.
Wow. Okay, I
I've
didn't
I've no
expect that.
issues.
I learned
I've no,
something new today.
there's going to be, I'm not saying that there isn't a little tiff here or there, a little like rift. There is, of course, we're all people, but, we're able to get over it very quickly, which I think is a great thing, because there's more focus on just, being in the present and trying to, live our best lives possible. So, some of this I think comes with age, definitely, because it wasn't always this way. It wasn't always this way. When I was like total out of control bipolar, it was like I would go 8 months before talking to someone, maybe years before talking to one of my sisters. And that sucks. That really
Well,
stinks.
and I can totally relate to that. I've got two sisters and we don't talk, but more that's because of the dynamic growing up where my mother in particular was abusive and not unkind, and my sisters learnt that dynamic, and I learnt that dynamic that you're horrible to each other, you're cruel and unkind, and so we
Yeah.
were, and then that was the basis of our relationship. So it's hard to repair that. For you, can you relate to that in any way? I'm you've mentioned sisters, so you must have more than one.
Yeah, I have three. I have
You have
three.
three sisters. One of your sisters you didn't speak to for a number of years. Why was that?
Because of bipolar, I was
But
just,
why? What led to that? Because just simply because
I
she
was, I
didn't want
was,
to be with you, or
no, it was me, I was so consumed with myself, and just being in my own little world, which, at that point there was a lot of heavy, hard drug use that I was doing, and that's one of the reasons, but also, just cycling between the mania and depression, and not having it checked in any way. That it's a lot to handle,
I bet that.
whether you're aware that you have it or not. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of work on top of regular day-to-day living. It's a lot of work.
Um, I I have to sit back and recognise that maybe I'm prejudiced because I was expecting to hear some childhood trauma in your past, but you've told me nothing so far that has led me has given me any indication that there has been any of that. I
It wasn't with
Okay.
my family. It's not something I'm comfortable talking about, but there has been trauma, somewhat significant too, but I'm not ready to talk about that yet.
That's okay. Maybe come back another time. Okay, but it is interesting that there is trauma there for you. When we talked about your grandmother, who we must come back to, she was not bipolar, manic depressive.
Yeah.
It was strange to me that then your father has absolutely no symptoms, is completely.
Well, it skips a generation. That's the medical findings, is that it skips a generation.
I must read into it because I'd always assumed that your trauma would have some part to play in it, but we won't talk about it. Let's
Yeah.
let's skip on. When did you first start to notice any irrational behavior or manic or depressive periods?
Sure.
When you realized you
It,
weren't normal, one of a better word.
well, in hindsight, when I was around 15, 16 years old,
Okay.
that's when everything started to change. I went from being at the top of the class in high school to, plummeting down to the bottom. My grades were just shit. Stopped doing sports, started doing hard drugs, and I just really couldn't cope with the lot, and that just, continued on, through the years, and some of the, obviously there's a number of impacts that it had on my life. One was I had to take a year off of college because I just couldn't handle it. I was failing out of school, and it was all because of the bipolar, really.
I can relate to that. I mean, I found when I went to university, which is the equivalent of college, that being away from home in a new environment where I lost my support network, even though it wasn't the best support network, I fell apart as well. I ended up repeating a year, and it's not something I'm proud of, I guess, to have to have repeated a year, but it served me now. I can relate, is what I'm saying. I've just rambled there. I'm sorry. Please
No,
carry
that's
on.
fine. That's fine.
Tell me,
Um,
tell me about it, college and the struggles, as well as the
yeah.
drug
So,
use. What drugs were you using at 15, 16? Where did you start?
cocaine, mushrooms, LSD, marijuana, nicotine, cigarettes, and alcohol, of course. So it was a whole suite, and that kind of stayed with me up until my mid 30s. Really really enjoyed cocaine, a lot,
It's
and
a fun drug.
it's a hell of a drug, as it's been said by, Dave Chappelle in that Chappelle Show episode about Rick James. It's a
Yeah.
it's a hell of a drug, and you just do such stupid things. I just got to a point where for years I was doing it, 3 to 5, 6 nights a week, and
Okay, that's a lot.
yeah, it is, and you're up until 4, 5 o'clock, and then you got to try and fall asleep to get a couple hours of sleep so you can go into work and kind of slog through your work, and then you do it all again, that night. So it's really rough, and obviously it's expensive. There's nothing good about it. There's
Matt,
nothing good about it.
we all have our struggles, and please, I'm sorry if you felt like I was critical of you by saying it's a lot.
No,
I myself
it
went through
is.
periods of drinking every night and smoking weed every night, um, to mask my pain and my unhappiness, really, and
Hmm.
my shame of, yeah, my dislike of myself. So I totally understand where you're coming from. The lack of sleep is what always killed me. I don't know about you, and I'm not talking about cocaine necessarily. When you do any sort of partying or you stay up late, that lack of a routine really made things worse for me. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, it was terrible. Like
Mm.
throughout that, I had jobs that really weren't all that challenging, I guess, or that's not right. I was, I, they were challenging. I was just able to come in, and despite, only getting a couple of hours of sleep, being able to like outwork people and, just do what I needed to do. But it's a really rough pace, and it's difficult to keep that up. But I did over years, 5, 6 years. That was me. That was me.
Was your wife around in the picture at this time, or did she come
Nope.
after?
No, my wife came after. My wife, she was really the one who got me to start walking down the path of getting my life together, like, reconcile with my family, get some kind of medical help. Um, and that's what I did. That's exactly what I did. Like, because she didn't want anything to do with me while I was in that state. She was like, you need to get yourself sorted, and then we could talk about being more than friends. So I give her a ton of credit. She's my angel, and all that, for both seeing what was wrong and then having the guts to say what I needed to hear. Because a lot of people, they might hear what I shared and just say, oh, that sucks, or, oh, that's tough, man, or, oh, sorry, whatever, any one of the number of things, because people generally aren't that invested in other people, like, maybe superficially, but it's not that often that you're going to get I mean, I'll just call it what it is, like a random person come in and set you to rights like that, which he gave me the tough talk that I needed. And I mean, also it helped is that I was extremely attracted to her, so,
Well, that
so
helps as well.
yeah, yeah. So it did help. And, yeah, so I did that, and then we did happily ever after. And that's what we're working on right now. So we've been together for 12 years, and it's been absolutely lovely. Been absolutely
Um,
lovely.
Well, the love of, in our case, the love of a good woman is absolutely key, and love and support from anyone, particularly when it's pure, is life changing. And it certainly
Yeah.
was for me. I mean, I went through this very difficult period of not having anybody, and then I met my current partner, and she's been with me 4.5 years. Um,
Wow.
and probably like your wife, made a huge difference to my life. I can only relate to your story by thinking about mine, but it sounds very similar in certain ways, where
Okay.
she really made me buck my ideas up and improve and make changes. But she forced me to do it for myself. It kind of sounds like for you, you made changes for her almost, and inadvertently helped yourself. Is that fair?
That's very fair. That's very fair. I did exactly what she said, but in hindsight, no, I'll say it was exactly what I needed. It was exactly what it was, like the combination of everything that I needed. If one of those parts had been missing, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. If one of
Yeah.
those components, between her attitude, her general concern for me, and then my family and the drugs and everything, if one of those had been like shifted in any way, it might not have happened, you know.
No. Well, how did you meet? I'm curious. Tell us about her. She
Yeah,
sounds cool.
so I met her. I was living in Nigeria at the time,
Cool.
which I was there for about 3 years. And towards the end of my tenure, what do you call it, tenure? Towards the end of my stay, this friend of mine came to pick me up. I was staying in this hotel. He came to pick me up from the hotel one night, and there was somebody in the front seat. It was dark out. I couldn't really see who it was. And I got in the back seat. In the back seat, they're talking, I introduce myself and she introduces herself. So, I know it's a woman, and then we all just kind of start with some banter. And he was supposed to have taken her home, and she was like, Tesu is his name. Like, Tesu, take me home, take me home, take me home. And he's like, no, like, we're going to go to this thing, which I was like, this is really rude, like she's asking
Yeah.
you to drop her off, but you're taking her to, it was this hotel bar where we were meeting up with other folks and, getting ready to party, that kind of thing. And I was just like, I was kind of offended because I didn't say anything because I didn't know what their relationship was. This is the first time I'd ever met her. So I we get to the bar, we get to the parking lot, we get out, and I took one look at her and I was like, oh, like I started tripping over my own feet. My like tongue was bigger than my mouth. I was just like, holy shit, like this is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And it was
So
like that.
she's
It was,
cute.
yeah, it was love at first sight. It was love at first sight. And then from there on, I went after her very aggressively, and she and I spent a lot of time together. And once she got to know me, she was like, "Dude, you're a mess. You need to get your life together. Like, you really need to like go home to America and get your life together." And I couldn't really disagree with her. And about 4 or 5 months later, that's exactly what I did.
So then you left Nigeria
Hmm.
on, I don't want to say her orders, but she helped you
Inspiration. Let's call it inspiration.
inspiration.
Yeah.
And you went home without her.
Yeah, I went home without her, and then I was here, and I was, remember I didn't have a place to stay because I was over in Nigeria for years, and I also didn't have much of a network. I had a couple friends, and I kind of begged one of them to let me stay with him, and so he very generously let me stay on his couch. He kicked me out of the house one night, and so I was kind of on my own. And it just, I mean, that whole period just sucked. It was 3 months of homelessness and joblessness, and I didn't have the support. And then one day he was like, "Dude, this is it. I can't let you stay here anymore." And I just begged and pleaded with my parents, and they let me stay with them, which was amazing. And my dad was just like, "You need to pull it together because you're an absolute train wreck." And so I went, saw a psychologist, and within 15 minutes of talking to her, she was like, "Look, you are classic bipolar. You need to start taking medication now. Like, here, go to these doctors, like pick one of these doctors that I have a relationship with and start getting treatment." And that's exactly what I needed to hear, and that's also exactly what I needed to do. So I went and did it, and yeah, the rest is history.
What was
It
your
hasn't.
relationship? Sorry to cut you off. We were talking
Yeah.
about drugs previously. What was your relationship like with drugs at this period when you were diagnosed? Were you still using?
I had just stopped. I stopped. I mean, when I was staying with this friend of mine, we both loved cocaine still, and we just did, it was like a nightly thing. It was just a nonstop. Like, it was like Fourth of July. It was New Year's Eve, like every night for like 3.5 months, something like that. And I still smoking cigarettes at the time, still doing weed, still drinking. But then when I got to my parents, I didn't even do it consciously, to be honest. But I just quit cold turkey. Everything. I just quit, and I had no kind of relapse. Like, I didn't go back and do any kind of hard drinking or smoking anything. I didn't have any withdrawal symptoms at all, which I thought was amazing. It was also really helpful. It's like everything just kind of aligned for me, thankfully. And all these things came together. I stopped doing drugs. I started getting the help that I needed to get. And, I was rebuilding with my parents and sisters at that time.
And I assume your parents didn't know about your drug use prior to you moving back home. I'm wondering if one of the reasons you found it so easy to stop is because you didn't want them to know about your usage, and you didn't
They
feel
were
comfortable
aware.
doing it in
They,
front of them.
they knew I did drugs.
Okay. But to the
Yeah.
extent that you were doing them?
Not to the extent that I was doing them.
So is that
Not to
fair
the,
to say it was easier to stop because
I would say
you
that
didn't
was a
want to
component.
embarrass them?
Yeah, that was definitely a component of it. Definitely a component of it. You
So
get kind of whipped back to being a little kid and wanting to make mommy and daddy happy.
how old were you at this point?
At this point, I was 37, 38. something like that.
And your sisters were around because they weren't living at home, but
No, they weren't living at home. They all had. I mean, at that point, I think two of them were. I know that two of them were married, and one of them, was just in a stable relationship out in California. So yeah, they weren't at home. I mean, they were adults. My youngest sister is 10 years younger than me. She's 10 years my junior, and you know, the the second eldest is what, 2 years behind me, and then the third eldest is, God, I should know this, 5 years behind me, something like that. So they're,
I,
they're all grown adults is the point that I'm making.
I only ask because I was curious about the one you repaired your relationship with. What was the relationship like with your sisters growing up
Um,
and as you got older? For me, it was always a struggle with both of them. And I think that fueled my mental health struggles in that I didn't have that kind, loving support network. But I don't know if it was the same for you.
with one of them, it took years. It was impossible, and I was kind of frustrated. I felt like, she made it really difficult on me, welcome me back, so to speak. My middle sister, like immediately, she was like, "Great, I'm glad you're back. I love you." I'm like, "Great, that was easy." The other one gave me some pushback for a few months, but then she's like, "Okay, like I get it. You have a serious mental illness. Like that explains a lot. I love you. You're back." The other one, it took what felt like eons, and she just, it was difficult. It was
This is the
difficult for her.
youngest sister, right?
No, this is the eldest.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was really hard. It was really hard getting back into her good graces, and ultimately I did, and we're great friends now. We're great friends, but it was really hard, and it was really frustrating. One of the things with bipolar is that, aside from just living life, you're dealing with bipolar as well, and just like the management of it, and just the day-to-day grind of having to remember to take your medication, having to like do some kind of check-in to make sure you're not having like symptoms, making sure you go to your doctors, yada yada yada. Like there's this whole level that normal people don't have to worry about all that much. So I don't think that somebody who doesn't have it can really get it. And I think that she didn't fully understand like just how serious of an illness bipolar is. Because this time I was trying to get her back. Like I didn't have anything. Remember, I literally came back with a suitcase with a couple pairs of pants and a couple shirts. Literally, that was it. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything. And I relied on the kindness of people to, help see me through. And so that's hugely stressful. I ultimately
Yeah.
got like a retail job with my while I was staying with my parents. And then this was unfortunately during the Great Recession when like nobody was hiring, and my resume was just so weird because I'm off in Nigeria. Like how do you really translate that to other work stateside? I'm like better suited to be a country director of an organization than anything. But I didn't want to do that anymore. So what I did was went back to school and ended up getting two master of science degrees, which I regret completely. Anybody listening, think twice, think four times about going back to school unless you're going to be like an engineer, a lawyer, a doctor. Like forget it. Don't do it because it is damn expensive, and I haven't seen the benefits of it, to be honest. And I
That
have.
that I completely agree with. We'll come back to your struggles, but going to university was a waste of time for me. I spent 4 years doing a 3-year biology degree, and I've never used it. Jordan Peterson's been doing some work recently studying the American educational system, and it's all based on an old Russian system, which is basically training soldiers to behave and to stand in line and to run here and to shoot here when
Oh,
required.
interesting.
And now the American system is just training workers to do the same thing. And that's the problem with capitalism being on top of us. We're just uh, given the impression that we need to go into the workforce, do our job, do our 9 to 5, just to make some billionaire or 1% of the 1% richer. It's unfortunately how it works. But I agree with you. Education's not all it's cracked up to be. I think you're better off learning a skill or a trade, something you
Yeah, I
really
agree.
enjoy, or, pursuing a hobby, even if it's, I don't even, I'm making something up, painting plates, like decorating plates. Not that that's a bad thing, but that's if that's what you do, you should pursue it and do what you love. Don't
Yeah,
worry about school.
I agree.
Mm.
I think that high school equips you pretty well to operate in the world, and then just go out and start a business. I mean, I think that's a lot better for a lot of folks um, than going on to the school. Because, and to come back to the point that I was going to make, you go back to school, and whether it's undergrad or grad work, it's going to be expensive unless you get some kind of scholarship or some kind of grant. It's just like the money isn't worth it. And the reason that I went back and I ended up getting 2 degrees instead of 1 degree, it was, even though I had started getting treatment for bipolar. Remember from earlier, I said that I wasn't as serious with it as I was
Not at that point,
when,
no.
yeah, as I was, starting 5 years ago and 5, 6 years ago. So, the decision to take on 2 master science degrees concurrently, like, that was a very bipolar move. Like, I initially, like I said, just wanted to get one, but then I had, a manic episode, and I decided to get two. And so I went and I ended up getting 2 degrees. I graduated literally at the top of my class. I got an award for top student in the whole program. And yeah, and I grad. So, truth, this is all true. No
No,
fabrication
no
here.
one disbelieves you. No one disbelieves you.
Six 6 months out from graduation, I started interviewing companies. I started interviewing to get a job, obviously, and the graduation date came closer and closer and closer. And, there's all these um, companies that come on campus, and they hire everybody from, Accenture to the CIA to you name it, everybody in between. And I didn't get hired by anybody. And so there was I did get a job eventually through this one company whose um, their forums, they had, like, community forums I was really active on, and I put up some great content. And then this one guy, the moderator, he threw my information over to the CEO, and he was like, holy shit, hire this guy. So he did, and that worked out, but it had absolutely nothing to do with my degrees at all.
Yeah,
And the school that I went to, I might as well mention, since I'm dragging them through the mud right now. It was
please go on.
Syracuse University, and they
Okay.
tout this, they tout this, yeah, good school, allegedly. They
Yeah.
tout this strong alumni group, and they tout, all these kind of benefits to help their alumni. And I just haven't seen any of it. And I've stopped looking. They've completely failed in my book, and I've stopped looking. I've stopped looking for support from them in any way, because they just don't have it.
I'm sorry to hear. How much of what you just said is your own genuine, honest, maybe a brutally blunt question, but how much of that is your negativity, and how much is that genuinely that's the situation with Syracuse? Because for me, I find that when I'm too negative about things, I don't see the whole picture. I bring negativity towards myself. If you approach a conversation in a negative manner, in an aggressive manner, you're likely to get a negative and aggressive reaction back.
Mm.
And if you look at things in a depressive, sad, feeling sorry for yourself manner, I think you also bring that on yourself. I don't know. That's my own experience. Maybe I'm being unfair on you. Maybe I'm being unfair on you.
Well, I
I'm
mean, I
sorry.
can
I
only
shouldn't
speak
say
from
that.
my experience. I can only
Yeah,
speak from my
please.
experience, and that's what it was. I was very disappointed for the amount of money, for the return on investment.
Yeah, that's
Um,
the thing that sucks for sure.
and then you're saddled with this, epic debt
Huge
that,
debt.
yeah, that's, it's just going to take forever to pay off.
How was your bipolar at this point?
I was probably doing the bare minimum to
In
manage
terms
it.
of helping yourself?
Yeah, because
Right.
I didn't. I mean, I was a student. I didn't have any kind of insurance, and I had to rely on Medicaid, which is a government-sponsored
Hmm.
insurance.
Hmm.
And I had to go to services that helped low-income folks, and they're doing great work, but it just isn't the best system. Dealing with a private practitioner, it's a lot better. You can see them almost when you want. You have like a regular cadence of appointments. Here, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. And so, I was like, fine, great, like I don't have to see the doctor as much. This is awesome. But that's not how it's
It's not
supposed
the
to be.
approach, is it?
Yeah, no, it isn't.
It's also great to build a personal relationship with your doctor because they understand you better and they've seen the highs and lows. They've seen the manic and depressive episodes, and they know that you've tried this combination of medication. And that's not always easy. And I know that from personal experience, having lived around a lot and not feeling cared for by both schools, family, and doctors. But to build that one relationship with a physician is very important if you can do it. I guess this is to listeners more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's really two doctors that you need to effectively manage bipolar. One is going to be your psychiatrist. That's the one who's, giving you the medication and, helping you with adjustments and all that jazz. And then the other is your psychologist, which is of course the talk therapy that you do however often you need to do it. Right now, I'm seeing a psychologist basically once a month. I just don't feel like I need to have a weekly check-in, but I do feel like I need to have a check-in so that she can see me and help me determine whether or not I'm having symptoms, because it's difficult for bipolar people to assess whether or not they have symptoms.
Give me a second. I'm just going to
Yeah.
stop the recording.
Okay.